Why did Spirit Airlines fail? What were the major reasons why an established brand fell over in a matter of months? You might hear a lot of things that make this failure sound a lot more complex than it is. The reason why the airline failed is for the same three reasons that many companies have failed in the US. And I'm going to get into what those three reasons are in just a second. If you're new to this channel, thanks for hopping on. If it's your first time hearing or first time watching this, make sure you give me a follow. And thanks for the support. So why did Spirit Airlines fail? The surface level answer to that question is that Spirit Airlines failed because it was a budget carrier that aggressively went for the bottom of the market and tried to be the low-cost provider in a crowded marketplace. And they had a 30-year run of being successful thanks to adopting that model. But when gas prices went through the roof, that model started to fail. That's the reason that broadly everybody mentions. Let's also note that this is an airline for the last 24 months had been operating in the red and had some really serious financial problems. But if you want to drill down into the root causes for the failure of this airline, it's really down to three things. First, like many other companies in corporate America, you have an outsized executive compensation plan. Dave Davis, Spirit Airlines CEO, got himself a bag. After the previous CEO resigned, he was able to lock down a compensation package that was pretty sweet. Now, the airline had filed for bankruptcy protection, and their CEO, Ted Christie, stepped down after a 6-year tenure, and he was replaced by Dave Davis. And you would think that a company that has filed for bankruptcy protection and had a restructuring at the executive suite would probably be a little bit more prudent in terms of how its compensation package is supposed to be designed. But that clearly wasn't the case. Davis came on to Spirit Airlines with a base salary of almost $1 million and then a signing bonus of $4 million that was going to be paid in 2 separate installments. And that was after paying out his predecessor, who also had a $1 million pay package and a $4.4 million payout. When you look at some of the root causes for the failure of Spirit Airlines, executive compensation definitely needs to come into the conversation, especially considering that this budget provider has likely one of the bigger gaps in wages between their frontline employees and their C-suite. And when you have compensation models that are way out of whack, like Spirit Airlines and other companies, that creates a risk that you might not be willing to bear. A second factor that you need to consider when you're examining the failure of Spirit Airlines is an overall U.S. business model that relies on anti-competitive practices and acquisition as a way to grow. Spirit Airlines came into the market as a low-cost provider. They decoupled everything about their pricing model into their fares, and they were able to undercut the market by doing so. Now, that had impact in terms of all sorts of things up and down through their customer experience, and it also had all sorts of impacts when it came to their overall reputation in the marketplace. But they were able to survive for nearly 40 years using that budget model. Now, when you have that budget model, you become extremely sensitive to external factors. And the cost of innovation, while being a low-cost provider, becomes highly expensive. And what that means is that you are highly likely to be an acquisition target. And when they encountered their first round of financial trouble, they were angling for a merger with JetBlue. But that merger got denied because of the risk of anti-competitive practices. And that was the right decision. They should have never been allowed to merge. What you see across corporate America is this habit of stifling any innovation in the marketplace by gobbling up and acquiring your competitors. And what would have happened if the JetBlue Spirit Airlines merger were to be allowed is that the low-cost tier in the U.S. airline market would have been completely wiped out, and you would have seen poorer outcomes for the consumer. So the fact that Spirit Airlines wasn't allowed to bail themselves out by being acquired created a chain of events where we are today. While the executive compensation and the blocking of the merger and the tendency for the U.S. market to favor anti-competitive behavior and growth by acquisition all factor into Spirit's failure. What you have to look at also is the influence of private equity. Because when you look at the financial interest in Spirit Airlines. There was a chance of Spirit getting bailed out by the government, but that package was rejected by Spirit Aviation Holdings, which included Ken Griffin's Citadel and Ares Management Group. Those two private equity companies felt that they would be able to recoup more of their money if they liquidated the company and sold it off for quote-unquote parts than by accepting a bailout from the government. Now, what's interesting and is still a little bit muddy is what role private equity played in the bad financials of Spirit Airlines. We've seen plenty of examples of private equity completely tanking established brands when they enter into the market. Red Lobster is a great example, and there's plenty of others. And while I haven't seen any direct evidence of this particular private equity company doing the same thing, you can bet that private equity being involved in Spirit Airlines operations had a negative impact on their financials. But when we zoom out and think about the whole thing, should the government have bailed out Spirit Airlines? Absolutely not. The era of taxpayers having to socialize and absorb the risks of poor business management needs to end, because a government bailout of Spirit Airlines would have meant that the taxpayers bail out big business again. And this is what always happens. You saw it in the .com crash, you saw it in the housing crash, and you've seen it in any number of instances where poor decisions by corporate America get propped up and bailed out by the taxpayer, while all of their gains go into the pockets of their private equity company management team and or the executive team of the company. And what happens to the average worker? The same thing that happens to the average worker at Spirit Airlines. 17,000 workers were laid off as the company was dissolved. But guess who got paid? The private equity bigwigs and the CEO and the rest of the executive team made off like bandits, because that is what corporate America is today. So when you think about why Spirit Airlines failed, if you want to put it on a bumper sticker, it's one of many other examples of late-stage capitalism doing late-stage capitalism things.